So, when I started my series on naval aviation on aircraft carriers this year, one of the first comments I received was, well, you're not really covering the French that much, and you haven't mentioned the French that much. And that's arguably because the French are a bit in their own world. They are involved. They do produce some very interesting designs. They really do. But they also have some very, very unique scenarios of their own creation. To be honest, the French go their own way from the beginning, to such an extent that arguably you can divide them almost off from the rest of the world and evaluate them separately. Not because what they're doing doesn't have an impact on the rest of the world or isn't impacted by the rest of the world, but because their responses are always quite so different. And let's be honest, I'm going to give you a heads up now. The Burn is going to be there is going to be a picture of the Burn involved in this, and that's the French aircraft carrier, which of course has some very interesting internal systems and methods of aircraft management. As such, because they go their own way, and because they sort of end up going down, well, the uncharitable would say they end up going down their own rabbit hole dead ends, and the charitable will say they end up going down a lot of routes which actually are starting to yield results today, but for which at the time the metallurgy, the science, the technology was not ready for the concept or the idea. You can decide how charitable I'm going to be. Honestly, I find this an interesting area to focus on, because if I take Levasseur as an example here, I can cover quite a lot of interesting French aircraft, which were principally, and I have principally focused in this discussion, is on their torpedo bombers and their reconnaissance aircraft. That means the PL-6, the two-seat fighter he designed, I'm not going into. Sorry. It might become another video. But the reason I'm so focusing in on Levasseur, a gentleman who I cannot find a decent photo of, to use in a video. If anyone does know a decent photo that I would be allowed to use for future videos about the French in development of aviation, please send it to me. But he starts off making propellers. Then he builds aircraft which are designed by others. And then he starts designing his own. You know, he has all sorts of interesting work with various people. He even works with Georges Herbral, who is the aerodynamicist, who is a really interesting idea. Again, the French have all these really interesting ideas. But often what you see happen in terms of the interaction, especially with the wider world, is the French have these ideas, produce these really interesting aircraft, but they can't be mass produced, they're not really flexible. And what happens is other companies around the world take those ideas, they, for want of a better phrase, dumb them down to make them applicable to the technology that's actually available at the time, and then they use them to produce some really great aircraft. And you can see some of their works as aerodynamicists, etc., and their real development in aircraft design. You can see it in some of the best aircraft in World War II. You can see it in some of the best aircraft of the jet age. But the reality is, the French they get, in terms of aircraft, they get so specific mission set orientated in a way in some of their developments that they produced aircraft which can only do that function. and as such they are very inflexible airframes. Some of them look actually kind of interesting, some look beautiful, some of them look strange. It's going to be a fun video, I hope. Anyway, shameless book plug. Thank you to everyone who's buying copies. There are going to be some competitions in the beginning of this year. I've been kind of held up with them because of all the various things we've had going on. But my plan is to do some competitions, and I have some copies thanks to generous donors. Well, thanks to a generous donor, and thanks to the copies I was sent by the publisher. So yes, some of them will be going out as donations, as well, prizes. And yeah, I hope you're all going to enjoy that. I know I will enjoy sending them out as prizes. And thank you to everyone who's bought a copy. Thank you to people who are still buying copies. As said, I have my tax bill this month. Hopefully I get a check from them. So, uniquely innovative. Well, the first aircraft that he really does design himself is the Levasseur Abril A1 glider, which is in 1922. Now, here's the interesting thing you can think about, please. When you want to build a torpedo bomber for your one and only aircraft carrier, and you've got a range of companies to go from, you pick the company which either builds others' designs, or which has built a glider to design it for you and build it. I don't want to sound rude, okay? But I do think some of the, how do I put this, the design and construction methodologies used by the French Navy and the French Naval Aviation in their procurement is interesting in this period. They are, to say they are not being necessarily thought through in terms of what they should be procuring and how they should be procuring is an understatement. Conversely, though, and I'm going to be looking at some of these aircraft, not all of them, they don't actually produce that bad aircraft. Although, let's be honest, the PL2 is pretty much a modified French version of Blackburn Dart. It's got a single seat, unequal span biplane, and pretty much Levasseur went to Blackburn, and went, I need a torpedo bomb design. Blackburn went, we're working on the Dart. And so you get what really is a modified Blackburn Dart. But this might explain to you why Levasseur is the company chosen. The French build 11. They have a single carrier, and they are procuring their own aircraft for it. They're actually doing a run of 11 aircraft. What are their other options? With only one carrier, what are their other options? Most of the major aircraft builders are not building that many more aircraft, but still, are they going to stop their production runs of their more successful larger volume aircraft to build 11 torpedo bombers? Probably not in France. So their options would be to buy British torpedo bombers, buy American torpedo bombers, or Japanese torpedo bombers, which in 1922 pretty much means by 1922, the early 1920s, pretty much means buy British torpedo bombers. Because there just aren't that many going around for the other navies. The US Navy doesn't really get into mass production of aircraft till you've got the Lexington and Saratoga in service, so I know they produce very good aircraft. I'm not saying they don't, but we're talking about the early 1920s here. The Japanese, I would love to say the French should go to them, but honestly, they're still finding their feet in terms of aircraft production. They're getting there. They've got some very good designs, but volume, and also there's the whole. Honestly, there's a hefty dose of, for want of a better phrase, racism, and racial prejudice, which you're going to have to get over for the French to go and buy Japanese at this point. So pretty much their option would have been to buy the Dart, which is pretty much what they do. They just get it built in. They get it modified to French engines and French style, and they get it built in France. So pretty much what they do, and what Levasseur does, is allow them to French wash a British design. Hang on, how does that add up with what I've been saying earlier about and then putting innovative ideas, etc., and coming up with interesting things? Well, that's all the case, but it doesn't mean they necessarily have the ability to deliver those ideas themselves some of the time, in terms of mass volume. There are still differences. This is producing upon scale and also producing a modified variant of something still gives you capabilities. In the case of the Dart, it is roughly a little bit over 10 meters long, 35 feet, and 4.5 inches long, whereas the PL2 is 49 foot, 8.5 inches long. The difference between them is one's 10.78 meters, and the other one is 14.9 meters. So there is over 4 meters length difference. Wingspan. The Dart is again smaller. It's 45 foot. The wingspan for the PL2, 49 foot, roughly. Height. For the Dart, it's 12 foot 11 inches. For this, it's 13 foot and 3.25 inches. This weighs more. It has, though, interesting enough, a more powerful engine, the Renault 12MA, and it has a higher maximum speed. It's capable of 112 miles per hour versus the Dart's 107 miles per hour. Also has roughly, in terms of nautical miles, it has about 18 more nautical miles of range. And its service ceiling is actually lower. It's capable of operating, because of its engine and the oxygen it requires, at a top height of roughly 8,000 feet. The Dart is capable of 12,700 feet. But the thing is, both of them can carry a torpedo, both of them can carry bombs, and both of them have machine guns. So they're very different aircraft, you could argue, looking at those stats, but they're built using similar systems. And the point I'd make, and before we get into this too much, I should say it's Taylor and Alexander's combat aircraft of the world, which has been a major basis of this, but also another different Taylor, a guy called Michael rather than John Taylor's, Encyclopedia of Aviation, Jane's Encyclopedia of Aviation, and a few other sources. I, of course, have the Blackburn book, the history of Blackburn aircraft, and a few other things going through it. But the point that you find is that basically the information which is coming back from the Blackburn Dart, which has been being developed for that, is fed into Levasseur, because Levasseur has worked with Blackburn before. So what he's doing is really using his own work with Abriel, using his own work, etc., and taking the Blackburn's research and modifying what the British are building a far large number of. Because the British build roughly 126 of the Blackburn Darts versus the 11 of these. He's using that information to feed into and make an improved version. It's a very smart option. It's a very, very smart model to go in many regards, because he's got access to a large pool of data. It builds a good relationship between them and the British, For the British, it allows them to test out ideas on a small scale with someone who's willing to pay for those ideas because they have them, and it works very well. Next we have the PL4. Oh, the PL4. It's again an interesting aircraft. It really is. I would love to say that all his ideas were as innovative as the PL4, but they're not. But the thing is, this is a spotter, reconnaissance, and to an extent, one of the most important aircraft ever built for the French. Because this is their flexible asset which they really use to develop naval aviation. It's their equivalent of, to an extent, the Fairey 3F and the Blackburn and the various other aircraft like that in the Royal Navy, in that this shows where the information can grow. Because you start off by approaching aviation as a reconnaissance tool, i.e. going getting the information and telling you what they saw when they were over there. Then you've got radio, so you've got live communication of what's going on over there. Then you've got spotting, which is live communication of what's going over there and where your shots are hitting, so you can correct, so you can hit the correct target. Well, this is how the French Navy really starts to grow and develop this idea. They start to develop it using the PL4. It's considered a more conventional design than the PL2 in some regards. It's certainly considered a intriguing design. It has a Lorraine Dietrich 12 LEB water-cooled piston engine, which can only give it 450 horsepower. But its service ceiling is 16,000 feet. Now this is something interesting at this point. They're developing engines, and the first thing they have to work out is how do you have to get more air into the engine. Because as air you go up, air becomes less dense. So you have to try and force air in more. So you still have enough oxygen going into the engine to allow it to burn at an efficient rate to generate the power it needs to. So that's a real effect on your ceiling of operation for aircraft in the early days. It's again something we often overlook these days, but it does come about. The Lorraine Dietrich engine is a good engine. And it comes from Lorraine, which is of course one of the areas which were restored to France post World War I. And so actually accessing these engines, accessing these systems was really important. There's also some politics into why the Dietrich family sell their shares in the company, and it becomes known as Lorraine from 1928 onwards. But at this point it's the Lorraine Dietrich engine, and it's a good engine, especially for a reconnaissance aircraft. It's reliable, as much as they ever are. And then we have the PL7. Now, I'm keeping to the reconnaissance aircraft and torpedo bombers, so you might be going, well, Alex, you've just skipped 5 and 6. Well, I have, but they're fighters, and, well, they could be a whole other video, because that's where Levasseur really goes even more Levasseur than he normally does. Now, the PL7 has 46 of copies built. 46. And it comes at a critical time. It's a single bay biplane. Some would argue it's conventionally designed, but honestly, I would say it's got a lot of interesting nuance to its convention. It's conventionally looking in its design. It's not necessarily conventional in its design. There is a reason why the French Navy have reservations about the wing design. And they actually have, from their original order of 15, 5 delivered with a shortened span. Just to test them out. And another machine which was built with a completely different wingspan. The fact is, though, being the French, they put them all into service aboard the Burn in 1930, and very quickly decided that the remainder of the order, which would end up being roughly 46 aircraft in the end, would not have the 18-meter wingspan that they originally were designed with. Will have the 16.5-meter wingspan that they had asked for. They also tried 17.25 meters, but they decided the 16.5 meters worked best. They also modified the existing PL7s, the ones with the 18-meter wingspan, down to the 16.5 meter standard. There is a debate as to what happens to the 17.25 meter machine. There is an actual debate as to what happens, which I don't find surprising. Because when you consider they have a boat-shaped fuselage, they are watertight, and they have small floats on the outside of the lower wings, you sort of think, well, these are carrier aircraft. Why are they being designed such? Well, there's a reason. At this point, Levasseur and the French Navy were both getting worried about various operations on and off their carriers. And they were sort of right to, because PL7s themselves were grounded as a type in 1931 after 2 aircraft disintegrated in flight. This was attributed to vibration problems. So they reinforced the wing bracing, engine mounts, added new free-bladed metal propellers, which is kind of disheartening for someone who literally started his company as a propeller maker. And the aircraft are actually back in service on Burn at the outbreak of World War II, but they had, from 1934 to 36, been relegated to land duties only. But at the outbreak of World War II, there is nothing better available, so they are out there. They are out there. I do love it. This is one of the points to make when people start to say the swordfish is outdated. There are other aircraft out there. The swordfish in 1939 is not outdated. The problem that happens with the swordfish is that it's so good at being adapted to other roles, it's still around at the end of the war when there are jet aircraft around, and then it really does look outdated. But it's not. Now, the main problem, I would say, with these aircraft is that you had the Farman 12WE 550 horsepower engine. And as much as I'm a fan of some of the French 12-cylinder engines, and they do produce some really, really nice engines, Farnham have a habit of playing around with Napier designs. And this design was specifically based on the Napier Lion design. It uses the cylinder layout, and it uses similar approaches to water cooling, etc. It's not a copy of it, it's an interpretation of the methodology of it. So please note what I'm saying. Okay, before someone turns up and goes, it was not a copy of the Napier Lion. No, it was not. But Farnham had a very close relationship with Napier, and occasionally companies at this time were known to basically go, well, we have to develop this type of engine, and you have to develop this type of engine. We have a working version of this type of engine. You have a working version of that type of engine. Swap notes. It's a lot more of, there are the engineers in this time are, especially building engines, are mostly engineers. And I'm not saying it's all a friendly club where they're all getting along and everyone's happy and everyone's laughing, going, yeah, yeah, we love each other. But it is a case of they are prepared to make gentlemen's agreements. And so the thing is about Napier. Napier Lion is a lovely engine, but you have to be very careful of it. The Royal Navy use it for lots of aircraft, and it's a very good engine, but it is a maintenance hog, and it is something which you have to be prepared to support and sustain. Again, Royal Navy has multiple carriers and is ordering hundreds of aircraft. The French aren't. And the Farm 12WE, the version which goes into them, is slightly different from the rest of the versions of it that's produced by Farman. And I think that version, which has been designed to try and get as much power as they could out of it at the time, I think that was probably one of the reasons why they were having vibration issues. I would say that they need, because some of the structural changes include structural reinforcement of the engine supports, and that to me, yeah, is where that's coming from. But again, a good aircraft. Service ceiling 9,500 feet. Not that great on altitude operations. Not that great on altitude operations. But also not that dissimilar to Levasseur's usual counterpart at this point, their usual friend, Blackburn, who in this period are producing the Blackburn Ripon torpedo bomber, which has a Napier Lion engine that produces 570 horsepower. Now I would say, in the looks department, comparison of two, and I'm going to do a separate video on the Blackburn Ripon at some point, so I'm not going to flash up a picture here. I would say they are very different aircraft, but the thing about the Ripon is it has a gull wing, lower wing, which is really quite an interesting design. But one of the reasons it ends up with that wing is because it's felt that's better to support the airframe on landing and takeoff. Again, both carry torpedoes, and both have roughly similar crews, roughly similar duties. The top speed of the PL7, well, that's 92 knots. Or 110 miles per hour. The top speed of the Ripon, 96 knots, or 111 miles per hour. And yeah, service ceiling for the PL7 set at 9,500 feet, for the Blackburn Ripon 10,000 feet. They are very similar aircraft. But the French get to build 46 of these. The British are building roughly 121 Ripons. So France is pushing up. They're building more. They still only have the burn, but they are also using them as land-based aircraft, and they are trying to grow their naval, their Naval, as they're calling it at this point. Yes, they still call it. And then we have the PL-10 reconnaissance aircraft, and for this to me is when Levasseur really starts to feel confident and really goes off. They're not producing, and please note, I want to really emphasize, it's not copies. Think of it more as data sharing. Think of it more as, this is bigger company doing research that I have good relationship with. They know I'm not going to be able to build something in scale against them, but they also like to use me to run ideas against because I'm a noted designer, noted engineer. So I turn around and go, my company needs to build something for France. They're never going to buy from you, so it's no competition. I need to build a torpedo bomber. What's the latest data you have on your latest torpedo bomber? It's this. Right, we're working on this, where we need to have really good aerodynamics. Okay, I'll have a look at that. That's the sort of relationship you have going on. And that's why you end up with aircraft which are not so much copies of each other, but have a similarity of timbre because of that data sharing. It's sensible. It's viable. It's a good idea. For both sides, it works well. And it's something you would never get happen today. Because everyone would have lawyers involved and it would all be equated and the accountants going, what's the relative financial value of this, that and the other, and all those things going on. Whereas these agreements, the way this is running in the 1920s, especially when it's being developed in the 1930s, is very much, for want of a better phrase, gentleman's agreement between the engineers. Sometimes they even happen on a holiday, you know. They might meet each other both in the south of France or somewhere else where they're on holiday and have a chat. And the data will be just shared. I will send that to you. You have looked at my design, that's wonderful. I will send the data to you. You have no written contract that data's going to come, but you can guarantee when you get back home, a parcel will have arrived with all the data neatly written up and prepped for you, so you to base your design on. And it does work. It does work. Now the PL-10 is probably, I think it's the most produced aircraft Levasseur ever managed to do, and it's roughly 63 aircraft. It's a reconnaissance aircraft, and by this point the British were heading down the torpedo spotter reconnaissance route. They're heading towards that. The swordfish is only a couple of years away. Blackburn is involved in naval aviation and all these things and still very much part of it, but it's the Blackburn, Seal and various other things aren't really what this is looking for. This is Levasseur really jumping out on his own. And they're interesting. He produced torpedo bomber versions with enclosed cockpits, and they built 2 of those. He built wider tracked undercarriage and swept back wings, which 30 are built. There are 30 of the original PL-10s built. And they're all powered by pretty much versions of the Hispano-Suiza 12LB engine. The 107 and the 108, because what they have is their PL-10 is the original 30. The next 30 are PL-101s. And then there are some examples built which are the PL-107. There are 2 of those built and one of the PL-108s. And those are given slightly different engines, but the PL-108 returns to the Sousa. It returns to the Sousa. Basically, they try 2 with a Gnome run of the 107, and then they go, we don't like the Gnome engine. We're going to try building a 107, but with a Hispano-Suiza engine. It's a single bay biplane. It's a watertight boat-shaped fuselage, so it could land on water with small underwing floats. Undercarriage that can be jettisoned in order if they need to land on water. This is what someone who was thinking about having only a single aircraft carrier and having a wide area of operations really does have to think about. In Britain's case, they also think about it, but they tend to be less worried about the whole idea of jettisoning things because they're just going, well, you're going down. It's not going to be nice, whatever happens. But the French are really into the idea of their crews surviving, and this is why Levasseur's getting these orders, and also why he makes the changes, and the aircraft are different in the way they're different. They are good aircraft. Trying to make them into torpedo bombers is sort of a way of trying to almost make a French TSR, I think. I am very tempted to think that the idea was that if you can give it a lower wing, an enclosed cockpit, and the ability to carry torpedoes, you have a one-stop shop for torpedo spotter reconnaissance role. And for the French Navy, that would have meant that for example, the burn, which is basically divided by its own lifts into fighter lift, torpedo bomber, reconnaissance aircraft lift, and torpedo bomber lift, depending on the weight of the aircraft and the size of the aircraft coming up on their lifts. If you can combine those roles, you can make your life a lot easier. And the French are in sort of responding to what they're noticing the British are doing in their exercises, but also they're doing it their own way. They're going for enclosed cockpit aircraft. They're going for all sorts of options, and they're looking at them, and they produce some very interesting aircraft. You have to remember, the French are the first navy to be truly pursuing twin-engined aircraft for their carrier aircraft operations. I was flirted with it. The French are actually pushing ahead and building prototypes, and are actually starting to try and test them and test the idea out. So there is a difference that's going on there. And that's actually the end of the Levasseur reign, in many ways, of providing aircraft for the French Navy, because once they're going for twin-engined aircraft, suddenly there are others going, well, you know, we can modify our twin-engine aircraft design. We can modify ours. The PL-10 has, as I mentioned several times, a Hispana Sousa 12LB with 600 horsepower. It has a top speed of 120 knots or 140 miles an hour, depending on your perspective. Service ceiling of 14,800 feet. That's roughly 4.5 kilometers. And a range of 326 nautical miles, or if you want that in conventional, or as I call it, French, 600 kilometers. No, meters. Sorry, I'm British. The temptations to wind up my next door neighbours, as they also have temptations to wind me up when I'm talking about their history, or talking about our history, is just so great. I'm restraining myself. I really am. And then we have these. What I consider some of the most gorgeous aircraft actually designed in history of this period. They are some of the prettiest aircraft in so many ways. And yes, people look at their designs and go, well, what do you mean it's pretty? I mean, this is a triumph of function. And they are specifically designed as torpedo bombing seaplanes. They are purchased for the seaplane base at Pierre. Now, Pierre, if you're not sure where it is, it's on the Mediterranean coast. It's right down in the south of France. And basically, this is the French Navy thinking, we only have one carrier. We want to have more flexibility. And they build 30 of the PL-14s. 30 of them. They build 17 of these. But whereas these are intended for the Commandante Teste, their seaplane carrier, which is a really interesting ship. The French have it running around, build it after World War One. It looks sort of like a cruiser, sort of like some of the seaplane tenders. It's a really interesting ship for them, and it's one of the reasons why they don't really pursue heavily the second carrier idea, because for them it works for a lot of their operations. Basically, you turn up, you position your ship in X, and the aircraft all fly off around it, and that's your area covered. It's a very good system if you want to set up a seaplane base that will patrol a certain area. It's a very defensive system, but it's a very effective system, and it means you can turn places which have no infrastructure into hubs very quickly. That ship turns up, it's all the infrastructure you need to operate those aircraft. You just have to supply that ship. You don't have to build a shore base. You don't have to build anything. You can just support that base. Support that ship. And if it's got the materials with it, it can construct a sort of boom system and a boom and net system which can stop submarines and torpedoes getting to it in a sort of little harbour, and it can operate its aircraft from in there, and yeah, the enemy to come and take it out has to send a full strike package to go and deal with it. Submarine on the surface won't work because it's got decent guns. But the trouble is with both these designs is they're just too usable. And when the PL7s have their issues, it's these which are converted, taking the float planes off, taking the floats off, turning them into normal aircraft with undercarriage to take over the role. And basically from then on, there are always 4 of these aboard the Burn to provide it with its anti-submarine capabilities. In fact, when they're removed in 1937, it's more of a... how do I put this politely? It's more of a, we need them elsewhere than a, we want to replace them. And it's the same with the PL-15s. They are put into storage in 1938. They are reactivated in September 1939 to do the anti-submarine patrols along the Atlantic coast and various other duties. They are just good, reliable aircraft. And they do their roles so well. So well. So, I always come with a question at the end of these vids. And honestly, the idea I was going for today was sort of an introduction to the work of Levasseur and the ideas behind some of his aircraft in a sort of key aircraft route, but I thought it would be interesting. But also an introduction to some of these aircraft, because I'm going to do videos on some of the aircraft that are in his collection, which are going to get their own dedicated videos, but I want to do a group video on these. And I want you to... today's question is basically, I want you to think about whether or not we could find a way somehow to return to the idea of before of producing your own versions. Is there a possibility to make it economically viable to build aircraft from the same research but build your own national versions? Or have we passed that period? Is that the reason why we have such huge and complicated projects such as Eurofighter and the F-35 and all these? Because we've passed the point at which it's economically viable to just be able to share research and build your own. Or is it more sensible, do you think? Is it more sensible to share research and build your own, because then you get an aircraft which fits your needs? And it does keep your own industry going in case of needs to expand it in wartime. I'd love to hear your views. Right, and what have we got coming up next week? Next week we have 809 Squadron, Royal Navy. And I'll be recording that probably over the weekend at some point. The reason I'm recording it over the weekend is because next week could be interesting travelling. So, the reason I say that is because this is going out on Friday night, and usually I do a Twitch stream on a Friday night. I might not be able to do it tonight. I might not be doing it tonight because I might be recording videos. Because tomorrow I've got to go off and record videos on the coast. Yes. Those Jack Speak videos do not get recorded by magic. Anyway, thank you very much everyone for watching. Thank you everyone for your support. Thank you everyone for being so nice, and thank you. I'm supposed to put in plugs in videos apparently to subscribe if you like and share. I keep being told off by YouTube and various other systems, I swear are automated, that I don't say that enough. So I'm adding that in at the end of this video. Please like, share and subscribe. There's buttons down there somewhere. I'm not sure where they are. Possibly down here. Maybe down here. I have no idea, but there's a subscribe button somewhere around here. There's also a like. I like people pressing the likes because it means more people see my history, and I enjoy that. Because that's the whole reason I do this channel, to share history. Naval history and loving it might not be a communicable disease, but I'm doing my best to make it one.